folks, if you're looking for a great show, you're saying, I don't know what show to listen to. Stop listening to Fox News and start listening to Patriot Strong Podcast. Stop listening to fake media and Newsweek and Newsmax and start listening to the Patriot Strong Podcast. Make it your daily mission to listen to this podcast and share it with your friends. Thank you so much, Courtney. Have a great day.
Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for hanging around and tuning into this episode of the Patriot Strong Podcast. I am so thrilled to bring our next guest to you. 2 or 3 years ago, the entire idea of crowd buying was another right-wing conspiracy theory. It didn't really exist. We weren't seeing all of these people being bussed in to all of these political rallies, to all of these events around the country. It was just something we all made up in our head. But today, I am bringing to you the CEO and founder of Crowds on Demand, Adam, to kind of explain a little bit more about what all is behind that. Adam, thank you so much for, first of all, sticking around through our technical difficulties and for lending me some of your time and telling my audience a little bit more about what the left is really doing with their Crowds on Demand.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on the show, Courtney. And it's a pleasure to talk about Crowds on Demand. Just again to kind of go over a bit about Crowds on Demand. We've been around for 13 years. We're founded in 2012. We are the largest protest company in the country. We only do legal protests. That means no violence, no vandalism, no property destruction, no blocking streets, et cetera, et cetera. I love what we do. I love to talk about it, and I'm excited to get into it with you and answer any questions you and the audience have.
So before we start into your company, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and why you thought of starting a company that buys people to attend these protests?
Sure. Well, again, one kind of important thing to note for you and your audience is that when we have people attend protests, they are people who are passionate about the issue that they are protesting. So these are not random people who don't care about the issue. These are people who care about the issue who just don't necessarily have the opportunity to attend. I mean, conservatives, your audience is conservative, and conservatives should understand this well, because conservatives are more likely to have family and work obligations that make it hard for you to go out and say, okay, 9 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to go to protest. It's like, no, I can't go to protest. I have a job. Oh, 4 p.m. I'm going to go to protest. No, I've got to pick the kids up, right? So compensating people actually facilitates people's engagement with views that they already have. And they're not people who don't care, who aren't engaged. I mean, I doubt most of your viewers would go to a BLM rally, even if they were paid a few $100. And I bet the people on the other side of the aisle would not go to a MAGA Trump rally, even if they were paid for a few $100. So it's we do have people who are paid, but they are passionate about the issue. A little bit about myself and what I started. So I used to be a campaign worker. So I started the business in college. That was 13 years ago. I worked on a lot of campaigns, mostly on the Democratic side. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of the bosses who ran the campaign, this was Jerry Brown's campaign in 2010. I remember I was like in charge of all the college youth outreach in Southern California. And I was like, they said, Adam, bring in, I don't know, 10,000, 5,000 kids, right? And they're of the 60s, right? Where that was easy. And I was like, guys, it's not so easy these days, right? So there was always a challenge, but when we were able to turn out the crowds to rally, it was effective. And what I noticed, it was even more effective when it was a protest. You could have the opposition candidate having a rally with 2,000 people. And if you had a protest with 10 people, you could actually get almost as much media attention as the 2,000 person with a fraction of the people, because the media loves covering protests. So I realized I was bringing so much kind of what's called earned media, which is what it would cost to buy it if you were doing advertising, to these people, that I was like, I should really start a business where I'm actually providing this. So we grew from there. We started in LA, expanded to New York, expanded nationwide. We do more than protests. We do marketing events, PR stunts, product launches, anything where you just need a lot of people and a real great context to launch something. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, now one thing that you said, and I have a question about it only because I've been watching reels kind of about the company, and not necessarily yourself, but other clips that you've been on. I've seen where people that are, at these protests, camera people come up and they ask them questions and they're like, "Oh, I don't know why I'm here. They needed somebody to show up and they handed me this piece of paper." And it's like a piece of paper with all of these questions and things to say to the cameraman. What about that?
Well, yeah. So
Just specifically
if
on
you're there
One
was
American News Network.
I'm aware. I know Dan. I was on Dan Ball. That was last
Yes.
week, and he sort of spliced and diced and didn't take my answer in context on that. Which my answer was that guy doesn't work for me. So you can't be asking me about someone who doesn't work for me in any way and say, "Oh, we'll respond to the fact that there is someone else at some protest somewhere that doesn't know what they're talking about." It's like it was a very disingenuous question by Dan Ball. So I think he spliced and diced. I'm happy to come back on his show and explain, but that was the answer that I gave him that he didn't care to add in that clip on One American News Network. So the answer is, though, of course, there are what we do is I have somebody who works full time whose entire job, actually multiple people, but like one person who's really a go-to, whose whole job is to essentially vet people who are going to any of our events. So she does like a 30-minute phone call with each participant in each advocacy event and says, "Okay, here's what the event is. Here's the cause. Do you believe in the cause? Do you know about the cause?" Right? And making sure, hey, this is someone who truly believes in the cause. So now, of course, like any vetting process, it could be imperfect, right? There are times where you might go to a Starbucks and you're like, how did that guy get hired? He doesn't know how to make coffee. So I'm not saying, we've done tens of thousands of events over 13 years. So yeah, there could be a clip of one person, one place who isn't well informed, but overall our people are informed. But the other thing that I would say is that in any protest, right, if I went up to any random attendee, regardless of the situation of any protest, including not one of mine, there are people who understand an issue really well, and there are people who generally support an issue but don't understand it really well. If I went to a MAGA rally and asked the Trump supporters their thoughts, there are people who'd be able to really well effectively articulate their support for President Trump. And there are people who'd be like, he's making America great again. And that's kind of all they could tell you. He's making America great again. And I love the guy. He's tough, right? It's like, okay, well, what about tariffs? What about China? What about NATO? It's like, they don't know. Does that mean that they're not legitimate supporters? No. You don't have to understand an issue perfectly to attend a protest. You have to support the cause. Courtney, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. So I have a list of other questions. People in the audience that are asking, how does your company mobilize crowds for events, particularly protests? And what are the logistics involved? But I also had another question. Were you involved in any of the political campaigns on the left for this past, election cycle?
Well, the answer to the second question is that we don't really comment on who does or does not hire us. And part of the challenge is it's a little bit of a finicky issue, because as soon as I start saying, "Oh, well, this person didn't hire me," then my failure to respond could be essentially indicated and interpreted falsely as essentially an affirmation that someone else did hire me. So I try not to really get into that. I will say that we work with a lot of conservatives and a lot of people on the left, never on the same issue. So we're actually a voice for conservatives in many cases, because as I described, there are a lot of issues where the silent majority, the conservative position, is actually not the issue that is getting turnout. You have a ton of lefties, some hippies with a trust fund who are turning out to all these, let's just say, a city council meetings or whatever. And these guys are attending everything. And the conservatives, who maybe represent 80% of the perspective of the people, are actually unable to turn out the people because they just have other responsibilities. So we're actually a vehicle for conservatives in so many cases, because the left actually has an easier time turning out sometimes than the right. So we're a vehicle for conservatives just as much as we are as liberals. And especially under Biden, we stood up for conservatives in many, many cases. I'll tell you that, without going into specifics. And I'm proud of those cases, by the way.
So why can't you go into I thought you were going to talk to conservative audiences to expose how the left works and like their whole political, whatever. But why
Sure.
can't you comment, for sure one way or the other? If you didn't get hired by Kamala Harris campaign or Biden campaign, then why can't you just say no?
Well, here's kind of the real crux of it. So you guys, conservatives, you understand cancel culture, right? And
Sure.
it was at its worst under the Biden years. So
Mhm.
there were a lot of people, particularly on the right, who came to me and said, Adam, we want to fund this conservative movement or that conservative movement or this cause or that cause, but we need you to run it and you to administer it, because essentially I'm going to get fired from my job. I could lose a board position. They could come after me and essentially cancel me, right? And a lot of very high profile business people hired us during that time because they have the right to anonymous free speech and they have the right to essentially back movements without putting their name behind it, because the cancel culture mob, it could come for them. And that's not even including the death threats that people could receive. And now I think there's right-wing cancel culture too, coming from the Trump administration, which I condemn equally as I did the Biden cancel culture. So I think people have the right to fund efforts without necessarily having to disclose it, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing. What I will say is we did a lot in 2024. A lot of times people ask us about national issues when I would say a vast majority of what we do, Courtney, is local and state issues. We do a lot of local and state campaigns where that are more issue focused than candidate focused. I'll put it that way, where it's like, let's just say we're like, hey, we need to lower property taxes statewide, right? We'll run a campaign and we'll go after conservatives hard, saying, hey, you talk a good game, but you're not lowering taxes. Or we might do that type of thing, right? So these are issue focused actions.
Okay. It just seems like it would be more transparent to, just say one way or the other, but that's fine.
Sure.
So there's another one. The perception that the left utilizes organized crowds in protests. How is that strategy being used in the political movement? I guess you just kind of answered that, but if you want to expand on it at all.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think what I'm happy to unpack is what I call the Russian doll model. So if you guys know what a Russian doll model is, it's little dolls that fold into bigger dolls, right? So let's just explain it hypothetically, right? So you have a demonstration, right? You got some billionaire in the center, right? That's the little doll, right? And then you have someone throwing a Molotov cocktail, breaking something, doing something illegal, right? Hypothetically, and that's the furthest outside doll, right? So the billionaire never orders the illegal activity. They're too smart. They didn't become billionaires doing something stupid. They say, we want to go after this issue, right? And then they have people who create a foundation. The foundation funds advocacy groups. The advocacy groups fund academic programs. The academic programs fund some other program. And then the guy on the street who's throwing the Molotov cocktail doesn't want to think he works for a billionaire oligarch either. So it actually benefits both sides, and that's kind of how it works. So it creates plausible deniability for billionaires funding these movements, but it also creates plausible deniability for the people who are doing the illegal activity to feel like, hey, I'm doing it in furtherance of some sort of left-wing cause instead of feeling like I'm actually just doing a billionaire's bidding.
Okay. Next question. In your experience, what impact have your organized crowds, your like bought and paid for people to represent these issues have on media coverage and public perceptions of protests?
Well, I think perception has everything. I mean, imagine the greatest speeches in history delivered to no people. Imagine Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech with 10 people in the audience. It wouldn't have had the same effect. So protests have a huge effect on perception. But what I like to say is we're the catalyst, right? So if you don't have a good cause and it's not compelling, having more people is only going to go so far, Courtney. So if it's a cause that doesn't have any resonance, yeah, you might get a little attention, but it's not gonna stick. But if you think about the Tea Party, right? That was well funded by conservative billionaires, right? And magnified by Fox News, right? And other conservative media. Now, that was the catalyst, but it caught on because people were tired of Obama's policies, right? On the right. So that caught on and then that grew. So what we do is we're like the catalysts, right? So if something doesn't have any resonance, if no one cares, then ultimately the movement will eventually die. But if it catches on, then it catches on and it was worth the money to put it out there, because I have people who contact me all the time who have extremely compelling issues, but don't have the resources to essentially advance them. And sometimes we'll take it on pro bono, but most of the time, obviously, we can't just take anything on pro bono. So we literally, sometimes those issues are never able to get advanced, where I know that if you put together thousands of people and rallied across the country, that movement would grow.
Okay. So like with those movements, with those specific issues, do you fund more of leftists or like right conservatives?
I think it's really a mix, and I love both. By the way, I have good friends on both sides of the aisle, so I'm an independent. I don't
I,
swear
did, I didn't mean
allegiance.
like you specifically. I meant your company.
Yeah, no, I think my company, yeah, same thing. Honestly, the answer is the same. Really, is that I don't have to 100% agree with a cause to do it. We won't do anything that's super radical or hateful, right? But we will work with like we tend to be an oppositional force, Courtney. So in a leftist run city, we will oftentimes work with conservatives who want to essentially push back against prevailing narrative. Like just for example, like defund the police or high taxes or homeless encampments, whatever. Like that just might be an example of the type of thing we might take on. But we also will take on conservatives from the left on, let's just say, an environmental thing, right? So you might say that in a state that is not taking environmental causes seriously, and it's building a big power plant outside, a vulnerable neighborhood, we might push back against that. So we tend to be an oppositional force, but I believe in advancing both liberal and conservative views.
And the email that was sent, like that connected us initially, it said that you weren't really welcomed on the left anymore. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's very true. And the reason is that I am not a party line lefty. I am an independent and I make my own mind. So I've worked on so many Democratic campaigns. I believe that people should not die due to lack of health care. I believe that people should deserve clean air, clean water, safe food to eat, good public transit, good services, right? Those are traditional values of the left. I believe we should be good to our friends, and America is at its best when it's a friend abroad and we're not bullying other countries. We're making friends. So these are traditional liberal positions, but I'm not willing to stand up for the orthodoxy, right? I believe that we should have law enforcement that is responsible, well funded, and given the resources and respect to keep our cities safe, right? I believe that you should not be 10 years old in transitioning genders, right? That's too young to make up that mind, right? And on those things, I mean, and that the countries in Europe that Democrats point to as models of good governance have said you have to be 18 and an adult to transition, right? And to do, because these are irreparable procedures, right? So there are a lot of issues like that where I'm kind of like, I'm not willing to just get in line. I'm not getting I won't get in line with Trump and I won't get in line with the Democrats. I'm an independent thinker, and the Democrats over the past few years have not been welcome of diversity of thought.
That was a good answer. Can you share specific protests, events, rallies, political events that you've organized crowds for and what the outcomes were, whether negative or positive?
So one that I'm pretty proud of, we can't share like a whole lot because of confidentiality requirements, but I'll share one which I'm really proud of. It's called Delete Facebook, and it was kind of in the aftermath of the scandal of that Facebook has been kind of manipulated by the platform was manipulated by foreign governments. It was used to divide Americans against each other. It was violating privacy, right? And there were a lot of people who said, hey, it was called hashtag delete Facebook. And we staged demonstrations around the country, most notably in Washington, D.C., among other things with that campaign. And it was actually very successful, so successful that Facebook very shortly thereafter wanted to change its name to Meta. Because the brand of Facebook had been so tarnished, rightfully so. Didn't set out to tarnish the brand, but we set out to raise awareness of the manipulation of that brand by really bad actors, right? And the fact that they were manipulating our data privacy, right? So we effectively raised awareness of all of what Facebook was doing, such that in addition to that, they started restricting political content by left and right, and are trying to sort of stay out of more outside of politics, which I think is a good thing, right? So they basically decided to retreat from a lot of what they were doing and instituted more data privacy. I'm still not a fan of how they run their company, but they drastically changed simply as a result of our movement.
One thing that you mentioned earlier, that like people who come to these things are very authentic in their beliefs. But in my experience, my husband and myself, we've traveled all over the country, taking days off of work, making the time to attend these events, not protests. I've never been to a protest. Um, Events, organizations of beliefs, whatever. The transparency in all of this, I don't understand, and maybe you can clarify for me and my audience a little bit more. If you truly believe in this cause, like, why wouldn't you just go to this event and rally for free? Like, why do you have to go and be paid for it?
Well, Courtney, I think if you're trying to say that unpack people's motives, right? The reality is people have all kinds of motivations for attending events, right? Like look at Woodstock, which
So
was like
why
a
wouldn't you
giant
just do
protest.
it because it's for
No,
the
well,
right
listen,
reason, or because, like, you really believe in that? Why do you have
so,
to be
so I'm
paid
saying we
to
should all
attend?
put so by that logic, we should all put a post-it note on our lapel saying exactly why we're here, right? A lot of people have different reasons. A lot of people go to protests to meet women. I kid you not, right?
What?
Like look at Woodstock. A lot of people there were there to meet women and smoke pot, right? They weren't there for Vietnam, right? A lot of people go to MAGA as a social event, right? A lot of people like the people used to follow the Grateful Dead, right? A lot of housewives went to BLM rallies to post it on their Instagram, right? So if you want to unpack people's motivations, I mean, labor unions send people to events all the time, right? And if you don't go to the events, they'll assign you crappy shifts. If you go, you'll rise up in the union hierarchy, even though it's technically not a requirement of your job, right? People go, I mean, you guys have gone and it's boosted your media, right? You've gone to all these events and I assume you've networked, right, Courtney? You've networked, which has helped boost the audience for your program, right? Which is great. That's an ulterior motive. It's not a bad one. But it's a motive. It's okay to have a motive for going. We as humans are self-interested people. I mean, your motivation for having me on this show is to have an entertaining program for your audience. My motive for being on this show is to clarify to your audience what Crowds on Demand does, right? We both have motivations for being here, and that's okay. I mean, it's not wrong to have a motivation. Being paid is simply one other motivation.
I've never been paid to attend a single event.
I'm not
It's my
saying,
own expenses, my own money, my own time. I lose money because, I take off work. I go to these events because it's something that I want to be involved in because I truly believe in it.
sure, I
How would
believe
you
that.
respond to critics who argue that organizing crowds, paying crowds, undermines the authenticity of the grassroots activists?
Well, I completely disagree for the reasons I just outlined. So to go back to that, are you saying you've never networked at any of these events in furtherance of your show?
It doesn't pay me.
Right. I'm just saying that there's a reason that you're there, and that's not a bad thing. By the way, Courtney, I believe you're passionate about MAGA and that cause. I'm not taking that away from you, but don't take away from my people that they're passionate about their cause, right? That you
But
are
only if they're paid.
well, no, they're not. It's not only if they're paid, they are people who are passionate about the cause that have a reason to be there because they support the cause. The pay essentially helps them compensate for the expenses. Now, if you're saying, hey, only people who have the means to essentially take off work, I mean, you referenced taking off work, gas, et cetera, like driving across the country for an event, then you're saying essentially we should limit, then working class people should essentially be unable to attend protests, right?
I'm
Because
working class.
well, what about? But it's a sacrifice. I mean, so you're saying attending a protest should be a major sacrifice. So if you're working class, attending a protest, I mean, working class is also a subjective term, but are you saying that essentially attending a protest should be an act of significant sacrifice? Well, okay, but you're really going to limit the number of people who are able to protest then.
Who are truly passionate about that idea.
So basically, but this it goes back to like, okay, so you're only a Christian if you go to church every Sunday and if you go to Bible study multiple times. Like, I think you can be a good Christian if you go to church every other Sunday, right? So you're saying you can only attend a protest if you're willing to make significant sacrifices personally to attend. I'm saying that is one category of attending a protest, but I'm saying you do not need to make significant sacrifices just to say I have the right to express my point of view.
Okay. I don't want to get into the theology kind of thing because that's a whole other show and I have a lot of
Sure.
opinions on that too.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll just move on to the next question. And how do you envision the role of organized crowds evolving in the future, especially with the advances with technology, with social media? You're able to send a screenshot to 1,000 people on X, like, hey, be here at this time. We'll give
Yeah.
you $50 an hour, $25 an hour, whatever it is.
I think it actually makes things harder in some respects, Courtney, because I think a lot of people feel that participating on social media is actually equivalent to participating in person. So I think in some sense, it actually depresses turnout at in-person events. So I think there is this effect that you're saying where you can raise awareness more quickly if something spreads virally on social media, like if you have someone who has a ton of followers who's posting it. But I also feel that in many cases it depresses turnout because people comment and engage online and feel like they don't have to engage in person. And an example of why that doesn't work actually is, you know who Cori Bush is? She's a far left, one of the AOC squad members from Missouri.
I'm not familiar, no.
So she was actually primaried by a centrist Democrat. Now, Cori Bush has millions of followers on social media. Her opponent had like 3,000 followers on social media. Her opponent won, right? Because her opponent did the work and walked door to door in the district and was able to beat her that way, and win that election, right? Same with a gentleman named Jamal Bowman, another far leftist from New York, who was defeated by a moderate Democrat, again, with only a few thousand followers on social media, because he did the ground game, right? So I think a lot of people kind of falsely think that social media participation is equivalent to in-person participation. So it actually hurts turnout in some cases.
Gotcha. I'm going to leave you in solo mode right now while I read another question coming in. So,
Sure.
You say it downgrades the outcome or the impact. You know, I don't know. I feel like it would greatly, in a positive kind of motive, affect whatever turnout, because there are so many platforms that we have that can share like the message about crowds on demand. But the next question: what are some of the lessons that you've learned about crowd mobilization and its effect on political movements specifically?
Well, I think that there has been more talk about crowds over the past few years with Trump and everything than there used to be. Like, there's this idea that someone has a crowd and therefore it means they're going to do well, or the opposite. Now, that's actually not always true, but what it does do is it draws media attention and it draws momentum. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, Courtney, which is that merely having the crowd as a catalyst that gets you attention that can help you build the movement, but it is not sufficient, right? I mean, if you look at Joe Biden 2020 versus Bernie Sanders had the crowds, Joe Biden didn't. Joe Biden won in the primary, right?
Eh,
Well, right. I mean, I know some people will say it's rigged. I mean, I can't, I have no idea. But whatever. The point is, same with the examples I told you. So there are a lot of people who can mobilize a crowd potentially, but cannot then build a broader movement behind it because they have a base that turns out, but it's not reflective of what the silent majority thinks. So the challenge is to use crowd size to actually build a bigger movement and use the media attention that you'll get from crowd size, which you will get, to then grow your movement to the people who don't attend rallies.
you know, some of the most interesting, like, little clips, reels, or whatever on Facebook to me are the Charlie Kirk events whenever he attends all of these college campuses, and we have all these college-age students coming up. He asks questions, they have a conversation, and it seems like they always back down whenever they're, um, kind of thrown like, "Hey, no, you need to answer this. Why do you support this? Why do you support
Sure.
that?" Specifically in this last election cycle, he like went around to all these college campuses. I don't know, you probably have seen the clips too. And
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, why do you like Kamala Harris? What is
Yeah.
her best accomplishment? You know, whatever, whatever, whatever." And they can't answer it. I think they're
Yeah.
there just to debate. They really don't stand behind any cause because they don't understand it.
Sure. I
So
don't
how
disagree.
do what?
Well, I would say that if you, I guess it goes back to another thing I was saying earlier in the program, Courtney, which is that if you ask any random supporter of somebody to essentially effectively articulate the argument for that person, right? You put them against someone who's a very good, intelligent debater, such as Charlie, right? They're gonna look stupid, right? If you take an extremely intelligent, if I take, I don't know, someone who's intelligent on the left, like Pete Buttigieg, and I had them, I had some random MAGA supporter debate Pete Buttigieg, the MAGA supporter will look stupid. I mean, it's like, yeah, sure, it's not really a fair fight, but I mean, I don't disagree with the premise that a lot of college students don't really know why they support things, and they kind of generally support social justice, and they're easily kind of marketed to. I mean, college, so it's I don't disagree with that general idea.
So, kind of playing off of that, how do you balance the interest of your clients? And I know we talked about a little bit about this, but we're getting more viewers, more questions coming in. How do you balance the interests of your clients with political, ethical implications of organizing those events specifically, again, for political crowds and causes? I feel like it's more of a political debate, one way or the other, the crowds and the events. So, how do you balance those interests? To me, I'm gonna take you off solo mode. To me, it would be very, very hard to like be that middle person because I feel like either you agree or you disagree. So, like finding, I don't know, like, hey, yeah, I'll do this event for you, and at the same time, I'm gonna do this event for you. That's kind of like hypocritical, don't you think?
If that happened, but that's not what we do. We don't work for the same. We don't. I can, but what I will say is, I could run an anti-union campaign in one state, and I could run a pro-environment campaign in another state. That wouldn't be unethical, just because I might be taking an environmentalist position, which is generally associated with the left, and a anti-union position, which is generally associated with the right. Those don't conflict. I mean, I think it'd be more of a conflict of interest if I were to take an anti-union case in one state and a pro-union case in another, and which sometimes we do, but the answer is that every case is unique. Is that in some cases, for example, union management, this is something we do commonly. We often work with unions on, and we work with management, probably more with management than unions. But regardless, there are cases where management is right, and there are cases where unions are right? Like, if management isn't going to let people use the bathroom, I would say I'm all with the union. If the union is saying, hey, we need like 5 hours time off during the day, I would say I'm with management. So I'm an independent thinker, so I'm capable of understanding that there's nuance in everything. And if I see that someone has a valid cause, then I'll take it on. Just as, Courtney, you can be a lawyer, right, who will take on a case. You could be a conservative lawyer who will take on a case that isn't exactly aligned with conservative values, or a liberal lawyer that takes on a case that isn't exactly aligned with liberal values.
So, just an example that like it's important to me, close borders. If you had somebody reach out to you like, "Hey, we really need crowds on demand to help us with this um event that is open borders. We should invite everybody in, America, equal opportunity, whatever." Would you take that on? And at the same time, would you take on an event if somebody reached out to you about closed borders?
Well, if you're by open borders, you mean let anybody in who wants to come in, then
Yeah,
absolutely.
like the last 4 years.
Well, if you're talking about, hey, do I believe in due process? Do I think the ICE agents should grab people off the street and send them to El Salvador without due process? Then yes, I would. I oppose what the Trump administration is doing, but I also oppose what the Biden administration did. It's you can't just go from one extreme to the other extreme. I am totally in favor of very strong border protections and zero tolerance for people who come here illegally and commit a crime, even if it's a misdemeanor like a DUI. I say send them back. But this idea that you're nabbing people and then detaining them without due process, and then kind of like detain first, ask questions later, that's un-American, right? You wouldn't like that if that
Well,
was done to conservatives. So I know you don't like that. I know you oppose it, right? I know in your heart you
but I
oppose it.
mean, if you come over here illegally, if you just like walk across the border in El Paso illegally, you don't go through the citizenship process or you don't
You
have a
got to be sent
visa,
back.
you're
You got to be sent
automatically
back.
breaking the law. So you're welcoming of that of
No,
people just
absolutely
breaking the
not.
law?
You got to be sent back. You got to be sent back. We have a process for that, though. We've got a process for that, right? So it has to,
Right.
we have to reform the process, because I do think that a lot of migrants manipulate our process, right? Because we are, Courtney, a nation of laws, right? And the idea is, and I think your audience would agree, I'd rather 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person be put in jail, right? Would you agree with that? That's the concept of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison. That's what they would say, right? We'd rather have 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person be falsely put in jail. So do you agree with that?
I mean, I think if you cross over this border illegally at any point, it doesn't matter what stage,
How do you
whatever.
prove that? How do you prove that?
I mean, people that
How
walk
do you
over the
prove it?
border.
Okay, but so you have evidence of them crossing the border. Okay, fine. That's evidence. Okay. So you have to present that evidence to somebody, right? We're a nation of laws. So you got to prove it. So does one border agent just decide, no, we're a nation of laws. We have a judge. Okay. Here's the evidence. Here's the photo of him crossing illegally. He doesn't have any papers, right? Okay. We send him back. I agree. No argument for me there, right? My question is, do you agree with due process, right? Do you believe that anyone deserves some amount of rights? Because otherwise, how do they prevent from, oh, Courtney, we're rounding you up and we think you're illegal. Oh, no, Courtney, you say, oh no, I'm an American citizen, I host a podcast. They're like, I don't know, I've never heard of your podcast. We're sending you to some detention facility in Louisiana, right? Okay. You complain, you ask for a lawyer, right? It's like, you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't want AOC to do this same crap to conservatives if she becomes president, and she would, right? So
She would absolutely never become president. Nobody would vote for her.
but you don't know. That's what the liberals said of Trump. That's exactly what they said about Trump. So I don't want to give Donald Trump any power that I wouldn't accept in AOC. So I want a government that stays the heck away from Americans' rights. Like, they
So
need
you
to.
like small government.
I like small government. Yeah, I do not like the government interfering with Americans' rights. And so I support guns, for example. As just one example, I support free speech, but I'm like, I want the government to know its place, which is to facilitate rights, not to trample on our rights.
All right, you guys, comments are coming in way too fast to single any or pull anything up on screen. My next question to you: what advice would you give to activists who are looking to mobilize crowds for their causes?
Well, the big thing for those activists is, my one big advice to anybody trying to organize for a cause is the best advice you can ever get is figure out who is actually in charge of making the decision that matters to you. So if you're talking about a federal issue, don't go to the city council about a federal issue. They have no say. And if you're talking about a local issue, don't go to your congressman, go to your city council. So figure out who actually has the power to get you what you want. It's sort of the equivalent of, if your flight is delayed, screaming at the flight attendant. Well, the flight attendant is not empowered to make your flight run on time. You're just being disrespectful, right? So focus on who actually has the power to do it, because the fewer resources you have, the more important it is to be really focused.
Gotcha. One of the comments coming in: do you believe that you specifically believe that illegal aliens deserve due process?
Well, I think that in order to determine they are illegal aliens, how do you determine someone's illegal alien?
I mean, if they have a birth certificate that says they were
That's what I
born
say. Yeah, but
here,
how do
if they have a visa card, if
guys,
they have
how
a
do you
residency card, if
determine
they
if
have
they
an ID card.
that's due process. The mere ascertaining of those things is due process. So, okay, you have an ID, you have a birth certificate. Okay, the mere idea of presenting evidence in front of and a reasonable arbiter, aka a judge, that is due process. So yes, they deserve due process, because otherwise any of you could just be nabbed as an illegal alien because you, without any possibility to prove otherwise, right? And generally in America, we're a country where the burden of proof is on the government to deprive us of rights, not on us to ask for our rights, right? Come on.
All right, you guys chill. A couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. I don't mean to take too much of your time. How has the perspective on protests and organized crowds changed from the very beginning of, like, whenever we started seeing this? The George Floyd, I don't know if you were involved in that. You can't say the transparency is not there, I guess.
Yeah.
But how has that changed since the founding of Crowds on Demand?
What's the question?
How has your perspective specifically on protests and organized crowds changed, like, from before Crowds on Demand became a thing until now?
Well, I think that, first of all, to reiterate, I don't support or do any kind of illegal activity. So anything involving burning buildings and all that has nothing to do with us, right? So in regards to George Floyd, it's really a good example of, though there were, and if you go to, like, if you compare George Floyd and the January 6th, right? What's really important is to distinguish people who, and I don't want to open up a whole other can of worms, with whenever I say January 6th, it's kind of like you're opening
A
a whole
funded kind of thing. It's a crowdfunded thing. It's okay. Go
Yeah.
on.
So, but what I will say is that there's a failure to distinguish between people who are there to protest and people who are committing illegal activity. And me, as an American who believes in due process, as I very passionately outlined, right, I believe that you should be judged on what you did, right? If you were at a rally where someone was violent, if you were at a rally where someone threw a Molotov cocktail, you are not responsible for that other person who does a bad thing, whether it's January 6th or whether it's the George Floyd, right? If you trespass, you're committing a crime. If you vandalize, you're committing a bigger crime. If you hurt someone, you're committing a very serious crime, right? Those, you need to be assessed as an individual, right? So it really has made me passionate about making sure that, and appearing on your shows like this to make the case that protesters need to be judged on their own, right? So you should have proof that if you're going to charge someone with, like, insurrection, for example, they should be doing something other than walking peacefully behind a group of demonstrators. Similarly, if you're charged with domestic terrorism, right, you should be actually committing an act of violence, right? So the way that I see it is there's not enough respect of protesters as individuals. So protesters need to be judged as individuals in these cases.
I couldn't agree more. I would have loved to have a conversation about J6 with you because I feel like that would have went very well, but we're coming up on an hour now. I want to be respectful of your time. So final thoughts. What messages would you like to leave with our listeners regarding the role of crowds in today's events that, they might be bought and paid for? They might not really understand everything that's going on. You did a kind of briefing about how your audience is kind of recruited, but what would your final message be to our listeners in this episode?
I would say look at the message behind every protest. If you agree with the message, you agree with it. If you disagree, you disagree. But assume that every protest has a ton of billionaire backers. There are billionaire backers like Elon on the right, and there are billionaire backers, like he who shall not be named on the left, right?
Well, wait. Why can you name Elon but not
okay, I'll
your
just say
left?
Soros, right? I mean, I'm just saying, that was a joke. That was a joke. Because he's so vilified on the right. Perhaps,
Okay, I gotcha. All right.
so that was a joke. But the whole idea, though, is that assume there's a billionaire behind any movement you see. There's probably multiple. judge if you agree with it or don't agree with it. If you don't agree with it, tune it out. If you agree with it, magnify it. It doesn't matter. This is America. It's a capitalist country. There's money in everything. I mean, look at what Elon was doing, paying people to be quote unquote spokespeople with the $1 million lottery, right? I mean, there's money in politics. Let's just be real. And that's not a bad thing. But what we do is try to, I'm a First Amendment absolutist. We pay people who are passionate about a cause to participate, and we don't do illegal activity. The company's Crowds on Demand, and we work with conservatives, though my views are more center independent. We work with conservatives, and we do entertain conservative clients. So don't feel like we're just a vehicle for the left. So that's my parting message for your audience. And thank you for your questions. And maybe we'll have to do another episode to answer more.
Oh yeah, for sure. You are always welcomed. I would love to reconnect. Just to invite you on. I know that there's going to be tons of people rewatching this on the replay on all the other platforms it'll be on. So if somebody is interested in starting a bought and paid for grassroots movement kind of political issue rally event, how can they get started in that?
Well, if you contact us, www.crowdsondemand.com, if you're starting it without us, then get as many friends and people who are passionate about it, and go figure out who has the capacity to help you get what the policymakers in charge to help, that can help you get what you're looking for, and lean on them, but lean on them respectfully. Always respectful.
Thank you, Adam, so much for your time, for the conversations, for the back and forth kind of batter. Love it. The comments are coming in so fast. You'll be able to, I'll send you the link on Rumble, X, Instagram, Facebook, all the things. You guys, my Patriot Strong audience, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for all of the chatter, all of the comments. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. God bless you. God bless this country, and together, Patriot Strong. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Adam.